Hey there, Alex Kidman here, today with a quick video review of UFODrive, an app-driven car rental service with the promise that you can, instead of having to deal with kind of awkward salespeople or difficult salespeople or waiting in queues, you can simply walk up to a car, couple of taps on an app, and you're away and driving. I recently took a lengthy holiday in the UK using UFODrive. Here are my observations for better or worse. I should point out at the start of this, I was not actually originally planning on doing this as a video, which is why this is mostly stills-based, but bear with me because I think there's some useful info and insight that I've not really seen in any other discussions of the service. So UFODrive's pitch is that it's entirely app-driven, but like any other car hire service, you still have to provide a lot of documentation in order to rent a vehicle. And that involves setting up a profile in the UFODrive app, which is available for iPhone or Android, and taking photos within the app of documents relating to your identity, your driver's license, that kind of thing. There's an obvious point of concern here because you're entrusting documents that could be used for identity fraud to an app and an overseas company. I did what research I could here, noting that, for example, while UFODrive itself is a fairly new company, it counts amongst its investors Hertz, the much bigger car hire company. So it does have some solid backing there, but as always, proceed carefully, make your own judgments about relative risk there. The sign-up process is also a little quirky, mostly because the app wants photos taken within it. And look, that's fair enough. It avoids fraud via doctored photos, that kind of thing. But it takes those shots very quickly indeed. There's not really a shutter button. And I had a couple of instances where I had to take a snap again and again, simply because it just fired up too quickly, the shot was too dark, that kind of thing. It uses AI to try and detect what you've taken photos of, but there's definitely also a human element to this because I think they actually got a little bit confused by my driver's license. I'm probably amongst the first, if not the first, Australian to sign up for the service. They don't have a presence here in Australia. I doubt they will for a variety of factors, but getting them to recognise my driver's license as a legit driver's license, yeah, that was a little bit of a chore. Took a little bit of a time. Don't think about using them if you're thinking, oh, I need a car today, because, yeah, it's just not going to work that way, at least based on my experience. Actual booking, that's quite simple. You choose your dates and your pickup location, same as you would with any other car hire place. In my case, that was Stratford in East London, and you get presented with a price. Now, I'd love to kind of talk about comparative pricing here, but I can't. The price that I was paying at the time I booked for a reasonably lengthy car hire was reasonable against the rates for EVs I was seeing at the time in the UK, but UFODrive uses a dynamic pricing model. It's all very Uber-esque, and that of course means that in peak times you can get heavier costs, and if you need to extend a rental, they will hit you with heavier costs, or at least try to. So on the return of the vehicle, I actually worked out it would be slightly more convenient for me to return it a couple of hours later than originally planned. And I thought, well, I'll incur a cost for that, but I'll see what that cost might be. And the cost I was quoted was actually more than 2 days of car hire cost for about 2 to 3 hours of lateness, which obviously I declined, but it's the weakness of that dynamic model that you can end up getting charged a little more. Certainly, make your comparisons carefully, make your comparisons smart, and you can avoid paying too much. The other hook, though, of UFODrive is that all the EV charging costs are covered in the rental agreement. You don't have to pay for power, in theory. I'll get into the charging in a little bit. You are, however, limited by a quantity of travel distance, basically a set quantity of miles that you can have. Apparently, if you use less than 50% of the mileage that you have either signed up for or been given, then you'll get a level of refund. That certainly wasn't my case. I went ever so slightly over, and I actually expected to incur a charge as a result. I actually didn't, which was kind of pleasing. I don't know this for sure, but I suspect they have a small quantity of overage built into their equations. Don't quote me on that, but that was certainly my experience, which was decent and pleasing enough. In terms of picking up the car, now this was an interesting experience for me. On the day of collection, I actually had to pay a deposit for the car. That's actually quite standard. It's just a damage thing, of course. Not that I damaged the car, but this was actually initially declined. I suspect that was down to me using a debit rather than a credit card. You might not fall into that issue. I just had to bounce and back and forth with the UFODrive people via their app to get that one sorted, which eventually it was. So I headed to the Stratford International car park to pick up the car. only to find that it wasn't there. In fact, one of UFODrive's bays had this kind of slightly wrecked petrol car sitting in one of its parking spaces. I guess if you don't have staff on site, that kind of thing might happen from time to time. But the bigger issue was I could not match the license plate they'd given to any of the cars that they had. There were a couple of near matches, but they were not the same car. So again, back to the app I go, and they basically fairly quickly just swapped me over for one of the other cars that was there. Now, I don't know if that was a transposition error, so the license plate just got mangled up in their system, or somebody had actually nicked the car I was meant to have. No real idea. However, that being done, the actual getting into the car process, if I hadn't had those two issues, would have been smooth as silk. I was basically in within the time it took me to film, walking around the car for my own purposes, and then taking a few shots of the condition of the car. Couple of scratches, not the cleanest car I've ever seen, certainly not the dirtiest, and certainly on UK roads in the winter, you're going to pick up a lot of silt. Quite a few of my photos will show the car looking kind of grubby. It's just unavoidable. But the condition of the car was fine, and I really was in within a couple of minutes. Much, much less fuss than a manual process that I've had before. The return process was broadly fairly similar, with only one other quirk, which was that when I returned it, all of the bays assigned to UFODrive at the Stratford International Car Park were full of UFODrive cars. They've only got so many, and they were all full. And thankfully, there was one other park, and I really do mean just one other park available in that entire car park. And I could stop there and check again via the app as to what I was meant to do. And they basically just said, yeah, look, just park it there. That's fine. We can see where it is. We'll come and get it. We'll sort it out. Which I did. That was a little bit stressful, and I guess it might be nicer if they had slightly more spaces than they have for cars, but I guess that's an economic model thing. Maybe you wouldn't hit that problem, but I think it'd be wise to give yourself a little bit of extra time just in case you have to move a little further afield. If that one park had not been there, I would have had to go quite a bit further afield into an actual paid car park and leave it up to them. It could have got quite messy. I'm thankful it didn't. The UFODrive app is also used for unlocking and locking the rented vehicle, as well as starting up and monitoring its power levels. It's not quite as refined as the Tesla app, if you're a regular Tesla driver like I am, though it does give you indicative power levels if you head away from the car while it's charging. It did take me a little while of getting used to locking the Model 3 manually, having become used to just walking away from my own version of the same car. Slightly more problematically, the Bluetooth connection that the UFODrive app uses doesn't always match to the car the first time you try, meaning that often I had to refresh the app and try again if it didn't want to play nice. Now, that might not sound like a huge chore, but it's not a lot of fun when it's -4 degrees and you just want to get inside the car and it won't let you. It's also worth noting that UFODrive locks the glove box. You do not have access to the glove box, leaving you with just the mid-console storage base for your own stuff. I presume that's because the flash drive that runs the dash cam of crash detection and so on is in that glove box and they don't want people stealing it or modifying it if there is an accident, but it's worth keeping in mind. The specific car I had also wasn't updated with the latest Tesla software updates, and I held off on this for a while because I didn't want to risk whatever setup UFODrive has in place for rentals locking me out. Checking via the app with them, they said, yeah, look, I could do so, but not to stress it, that they'd do it when the car came back, which of course wasn't going to do me much good. On reflection, while I shouldn't have to use my own data to do so, I wish I had, simply because every once in a while on the road, the car lost its map position and speed limits. Now, that might be down to the car, that might be down to the way Tesla does map data in the UK, I don't know, but it was a little bit frustrating from an Australian perspective where I'm used to being on roads that will relatively frequently just have road speed limits in numbers on signs. The UK uses a symbols thing mostly. You do get used to it, it's not that hard to learn. But starting out, when the map went blank or if it wouldn't show me what the speed of the road was, that was a little bit more stressful than I would have liked. One amusing aspect of my experience was getting emails, just the two of them, reminding me that the car was under a 30% charge. Now, I guess that's a good thing for new EV drivers who might be tempted to run flat, but the realities of my own driving meant that it went under 30% a lot more than just those two times, but I was only ever notified twice, and not at all the one time I did genuinely have a bit of a stretch drive that saw me roll into a charging site with just 3% battery left. What about actual charging? Well, look, it's a bit mixed and it's a bit at length. I have a written version of this review, which I will link in the description below, which you should go and read because there's a lot more detail in there. But the really quick and dirty version. The car, of course, wants to go to Tesla chargers. There's quite a few of those around the UK, although not as many in northern Scotland as I might like. That mostly worked in most places, except in a couple where the chargers were either frozen solid or, in one case, actually wrecked. UFODrive's app itself has its own preferred chargers. Not every charger in a location and not every charger that its charging card will work at, which is kind of frustrating. Also kind of frustrating here is that UFODrive's app will really only show you, here's your close local ones, which is great if you just want a charge, less great if you're trying to plan out a trip, and especially if you're not sure about whether or not supported charges will be available. One plus side here, however, is that UFODrive does say, hey, yes, we will refund any additional charges you incur from charges not covered by our cards. And they did. I did a charge at a Pod Point, the charges that Tesco have, and that actually worked. I mean, the charge worked, but they also refunded me once I showed them the receipt for the cost of that charge. All good stuff. So, did UFODrive live up to the hype? Well, mostly. Look, I won't lie, I've had some terrible experiences with car hire people, and I've had some wonderful ones. There are some wonderful people working for car hire places. I do not wish to slam all of them. But the experience of just being able to do it via an app was very, very good. The app could be better. You're probably going to have to pair with the car a couple of times in order to unlock it at certain times of day. I wish the mapping of EV chargers was a little bit better managed, and maybe having a few more parking spaces would not go astray. The dynamic pricing, I think, is the key here, though. If you're looking to use UFODrive, definitely compare the quote they give you against everyone else, because the quote you get at that time will not necessarily be the price that you pay later on if you were to book later on. I booked some months in advance and got what I considered was a fair price, especially considering that the charging was inbuilt, but the prices that I was seeing later were considerably higher, and they would have given me more pause for thought. Anyway, that's my take on UFODrive. Have you ever used them? Got any thoughts or observations? Let me know in the comments below, and as always, thanks for watching, and don't forget to like and subscribe.